going on, everybody? Welcome back to I Came with Fire podcast. We are here with Leslie and Stephen Shaw, who are the authors of Who They Are and What They're Up To. They were kind enough to send me, I'm holding up so you guys can see a little better here, but kind enough to send me their book a while back, and I read it. As you guys know, we have a deep interest in all things paranormal and strange, to include unidentified aerial phenomenon, aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, all of that stuff. So very excited to have Leslie and Stephen on here tonight to talk about it. And as you guys can see, Chris is still here. What's up, Chris?
How you doing, man? Thanks for having me back.
Heck yeah. Hello. And so Leslie, Stephen, why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves? Give us a little brief overview.
I've been a journalist for the last 20 years, working for the High Desert Star newspaper. And so I am the writer in the family and did most of the writing. But Stephen wrote his family's history in his part of the book. And also, he was my fellow theorist and researcher. Frequently, I would send him down rabbit holes to find out information that we needed. And he would spend days digging it up for us.
Yeah.
And also, Stephen has a more science education than I do. So the parts of the book that required knowledge of medicine and the brain and physiognomy, I needed his help a great deal with that part. So that's why we're co-authors. And we are both UFO witnesses. And Stephen's family, we believe going back several generations, have been victims of the abduction phenomenon, we believe. Certainly it was the case with Stephen's family, immediate family.
Yes.
And
you mentioned that you've been an artist your whole life, too.
Yeah. I've also an artist, and Stephen is a very accomplished musician. He was an acupuncturist. He's a retired acupuncturist now and Tai Chi teacher for many, many years, and is now an orchestral musician with the Joshua's Philharmonic, Joshua Tree Philharmonic Orchestra.
What do you play, Stephen?
I play primarily the accordion. I'm the accordionist for the Philharmonic, but
That's cool.
I play piano. I'm working on quite a number of pieces on the piano, and I used to play a lot of woodwinds, a lot of clarinet and sax, and then guitar.
Like really good musicians, he can dabble with many different ones.
I can hold my own pretty much with whatever. So
whatever a musician version of a polyglot is, right?
Yes, a polyglot. Yes, yeah. I'm a master of some, but not of all.
Exactly. Jack of all trades, master of none.
Actually, I'm a master of the accordion.
Yeah,
so.
that's his
his
main instrument.
Very cool.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
And we are both UFO witnesses. Stephen saw 3 before I saw my first, and we saw my first and second and his 4th and 5th while together.
Okay.
And it was actually, I'm a dutiful wife, and I believed my husband when he was telling me about his incidents. But, when you don't see it yourself, you can only believe about 98%, maybe 95%.
Right.
And then that day came when I saw my first UFO, and then, okay, now I'm a 100% believer. And finally, seeing is truly believing. That one was, we were heading west on Highway 62. Which is from Joshua Tree to Yucca Valley. We lived in Yucca Valley at the time, and it was at night and coming back from a meeting, and I looked up in the sky, and ahead of me was this big bright white light up in the sky, and it got brighter and brighter, and at first I thought, could it be a plane coming into Palm Springs Airport or something? But there were no running lights or those additional flashing lights, just blinking. One big white ball in the sky. Yeah. And we watched it just kind of hover there, and we were heading towards it, so it seemed to slowly get larger and larger. But then it took off north and over the northern horizon and gone in about a quarter of a second. I would have estimated it traveling at 20,000 miles an hour, maybe. And it took off at speed, not slowly ramping up to 20,000, but just bam, at 20,000 miles an hour.
No acceleration like that, gradually.
And silent. It was silent. There was no sound. And it streaked out into a long line. It moved so fast. And then the line collapsed in on itself. And, that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And there's no way that we have anything that can move that fast. It would have crushed any pilot or even instruments against the walls, taking off at that speed, with that inertia.
It went in the
Definitely.
direction of the 29 Palms Naval Marine Base. There.
Yeah.
So
We have a ley line that goes through Joshua
Well, Marines
Tree,
are weird,
and it
so.
seemed like it was. It goes through the Integratron. Have you ever heard of the Integratron, the machine that was built by
Van Tassel.
Van Tassel out in the desert of this area? It's
It's next to Giant Rock.
Yeah, very famous area. And there is a ley line that goes right through the Integratron. And
Okay.
I believe that it looked like that UFO was maybe traveling along it. That was my impression. And then the second one we saw together also moved. It was up in the sky, but we were down here in Desert Hot Springs, just a little bit south of the Joshua Tree area. And we saw another white ball moving in impossible ways, zigzagging kind of motion across the sky. And it, too, took off north, along what may be that ley line again.
Yeah, it was about 9:30 at night in our backyard. And our backyard is so tiny, so we have a very small window, very small view of the sky. And just walked out there, and it was almost like we had just moved down to where we live now in 2021, I believe it was. And it was almost like saying, hi, we know where you are, and what, we were saying greetings to you. It's just like the odds of us seeing that at that time, and we were not the only ones to see it too. We had there was a couple that used to live on our street. They also saw it too. So there were 4 witnesses to the same thing. Again, silent, actually fairly large, and doing the crazy rectangular. I mean the triangular movements. And it was,
when any craft we have, if it want to turns all the way around, it has to make a slow banking U-shaped arc. Whereas this one was making V turns, at speed too. Very strange. And Stephen's second UFO experience was actually a USO. It came up out of the ocean off of the coast of Malibu.
Right.
Okay.
And then did another bunch of weird zigzaggy motions before it too took off north, and gone.
That was in 2004. It was during the baseball playoffs between the Red Sox and the Yankees. I was at the Chart House off of Malibu, and I went to go get my car, and the valet went to go get my car, and we just saw this thing come out of the ocean and hovered there for a while, like just white, soundless, and do a couple of weird movements and go up the coast, going up north. And I said to him, did you see that? And he said, yeah, I saw it. I saw it. I said, okay. And apparently Malibu is a hot spot for
a hot spot for
USOs
and USO activity. Yeah. Yes.
By the way, I just wanted to mention that back in like 2006, I went to a party with some friends to Giant Rock, which is next to the Integratron. Giant Rock has got its own history that's kind of very strange in and of itself. There used to be an airport there, and they used to have UFO parties and things like that. But anyways, it was a full moon that night, and we had a couple cars out there, about 9 people, and doing some dancing and that kind of stuff. And from behind, being backlit by the full moon, these 2 objects that I, having been in the military, working with the Navy and the Seabees and the Marines, there were 2 black helicopters, and they were flying towards us, about maybe 200 or 300 feet in the air, standard, and they were completely soundless. And they made this turn. It was the weirdest thing. We were watching them. They made this turn. They Giant Rock was their point. So they made this turn, and they went back towards the 29 Palms military base, which I have worked on and done duty there. And these things, if it had been like a dark night, we would have had no clue they were there.
So the military does have black silent helicopters now.
We do. Oh, yeah. I do know for a fact that we do.
Yeah. But we don't think those are UFOs exactly.
No, those are moving like a UFO.
It might be reverse engineering from UFO crash ships.
Sound canceling technology. Whatever.
Well, if you guys may recall, when the Navy SEALs took out Osama bin Laden, they used a specific type of helicopter that supposedly was silent as well. I know Chris is smirk because one of those helicopters crashed as well. So, but that technology,
during the rescue,
definitely seems like it exists. But
it does.
I wanted to go back.
the operation. I mean,
exactly.
sorry.
But I wanted to jump back to the ley line thing that you guys were referencing and ask you a question because last Halloween timeframe we had on Chuck Zukowski, who he was kind of the focus of Ben Mesrick's book, The 37th Parallel and the UFO Highway. Are you guys familiar with the 37th parallel?
I thought it was the 33rd parallel.
Pretty sure it's the 37th.
Okay.
But anyway, I was wondering if you guys knew if that ran through where you guys were talking about that ley line, if that continued through that area, because Chuck spends the majority of his time sort of like in the mountainous areas of the United States, Colorado, where he's located. And he deals with a lot of things that you guys brought up in your book, cattle mutilation. But I was just wondering if you guys knew if that had any relation ley line wise.
I'm not
Brandon,
really sure where exactly where it goes from here, but I wonder if it goes through like Area 51,
37
or something like that,
or like through Shasta. I'm not really sure on that.
Definitely.
I'm more familiar with the ones that go through Europe.
There's a few going through Shasta. Actually, it's supposed to be a crisscross for a couple of them, I believe.
Yes, one of the major crisscrosses. Yes.
Yeah. So I remember at the beginning of your book, you were talking about some of the experiences you had and your father had like as a child. And it reminds me of a few other stories I've heard of. So there's sort of a precedence for some of the things that you've gone through.
Yes.
Sort of a trickster, chicanery type, experience you guys had. You talk about jumping on your chest.
That was me. Yeah, not my father.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And I remember your dad talking about the closet door being open.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask, like, the thing jumping on your chest and all this experiences, like, what was that like growing up overall? I know you talk about it in the book, but like from your mouth, that had to be pretty insane.
Well, I grew up in a family that I was told from pretty much day one that my memories go back to about a year and a half. I remember going to school because I was sick every day of my life until I was 2. I had chronically inflamed tonsils and adenoids, so I was sick. I was born sick. And I remember throwing up on my teacher's lap at Montessori school when I was a year and a half, and she had to like drive back home and change her clothes. And so my memory goes back pretty far, but I remember clearly when I was 3 that this entity would playfully jump on my chest and my stomach, wake me up in the middle of the night.
Invisible.
And it wasn't menacing at all. It was just, it didn't feel menacing, but it was annoying in a way. So it was just like,
sure,
okay, you're going to be jumping on me, like if you're a cat or your dog, which we didn't have a cat, and my dog was way too big. So it was just this being, this entity that would play with me. Okay, and I grew up in a family too that we were told from day one that we had a family spirit guy called Old Glegley that we talk about toward the beginning of the book, and that several people from different bloodlines had seen this entity at different points in their life. And so, this is not the type of stuff you talk about with your friends at school.
Sure.
My parents already had these weird British accents, and I had slight British accents. So, we didn't talk about this stuff. We kind of kept it within the family. We just accepted it as something that was part of our heritage. So, fast forwarding to when my brother was born. My brother used to sleep in the bottom of a bunk bed in my room, and I was on the top bunk bed. And I was 9 years old, and he's 6 years younger than me, so he would be 3.
At this time, he became afraid, and he said he was afraid of the little men that would come in the night.
Oh no, my brother, a little bit later on, he started sleeping in the closet.
Right.
He started about the age of 6 or 7. He started sleeping in the closet because he was afraid of the little men that would come in the night and would bother him. But anyways, this particular time I'm talking about, when I was 9, I was awakened by these weird scuffling sounds in the house, and I knew it wasn't the dog. It wasn't the sound the dog made. So it was just odd. So I got out of my bed and I started walking down the hallway, and I was fully alert because I was in adrenal phase.
It was frightening.
My heart was pounding, and my eyes were dilated, and my respiration was elevated, and I was like kind of terrified in a way. I was thinking, what am I going to see? Because it's not the dog, and these sounds don't make any sense.
Mm.
And as I'm about to turn the corner into the living room, I just go blank. I have no memory as far as what happened.
And we found that to be the signature for the alien abduction phenomenon, where you'll
Missing
see something
time.
strange or hear something strange, then black out.
So the next thing I remember, I'm a couple hours later, I'm back somehow in my bunk bed, sleeping soundly, with no recollection of how I got back or what I saw or what happened. And during this time, that was when my brother, like a little bit after that, he started sleeping in the closet because of the little men. I saw the little men once too, which, believe it or not, the little men that I saw, they were kind of shimmery and they looked literally like garden gnomes, and they were just outside my door and
they're so
in my
interesting.
door, and they were kind of backlit, and there's about 4 or 5 of them, and I don't know whether I went back to sleep or what happened on that particular instance, but I did see. So I understood why my brother was a little scared, because I said, I've seen them too.
We think this, at least our research is showing that this shimmery quality to memory is not uncommon when people see bizarre things, but then they'll break through these memories later and discover that the shimmery little gnomes were actually gray aliens or something like that.
Disguise.
And in Philip's case, one time Philip saw, he was 16 years old. He had a
different house.
Yeah, these incidents sometimes come in weird little clusters. This was all in a week's time. He, what was the first one again? Oh, the lights.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It was the 2 bright white lights that were outside of his window. This is in a very heavily forested area with a creek that was just next to the house. So there was no road, there was no lights, there was no possibility of
a car putting the lights
or anything
in.
like that.
So he awakens to these bright lights just right outside his bedroom window. And that side of the house faces the forested area especially, so there was definitely no way it could have been headlights. And as he was staring at them, he was trying to figure out what they were, and then he suddenly again goes blank, just out. And then later in the week, he heard a scrabbling. He was lying in bed, and he heard a scrabbling sound down below. And he reached down because he thought it was one of the cats. So he reached down to pet the cat, and instead a hand grabbed his arm. And once again, he blacks out. And then the third incident in that cluster of incidents, he awoke to see an actual tall gray alien in his room before immediately again blacking out. So it was then that we realized what kind of a phenomenon we were dealing with. And they do tamper with memory. We were just going over some of the more bizarre experiences. His again, kind of in a shimmery memory, his mother saw a basket come down out of the ceiling at her house, and it was a giant basket. It looked like a huge artichoke, and this thing pops open, and she says little Chinese people came out of the basket.
We're about 4 feet tall, 4 to 5
feet tall, and they started dancing around. Like they were dressed like circus performers. And then on the other side of the room, she sees a bizarre 4 foot tall little miniature elephant also dancing around. And obviously, this isn't what was really going on. There were no Chinese people. There was no elephant. But they tamper with memory. And in this case, she ended up remembering something completely strange.
Well, let me elaborate a bit on that. Okay. This all happened 1988. This happened the morning of Chinese New Year, which 1988 was Year of the Dragon. I kind of remember this stuff because I was an acupuncturist for 20 years. But anyway, so my parents didn't follow this stuff at all. So my mom was sleeping in, this is a house that we built. My dad and we built ourselves. It was about 4,000 square foot house, 2.5 stories. So anyways, my mom was sleeping in the upstairs living room. She's sleeping on the sofa. My dad was in the back bedroom about 75 feet away. So when my mom was experiencing this, and these Chinese people were beckoning to my mom, saying,
Yes,
"Hey,
come with us,
come with us,"
dancing
kind of
with
this
us.
kind of stuff, right?
Oh,
And
man.
there were footprints that
No.
were weird. When she got
Buffet.
up, my dad and I saw these weird footprints that were
In
the
the carpet, like impressions in the
Oh,
carpet.
But
that's
when this
weird.
stuff was happening, my dad was sleeping in the back bedroom 75 feet away, and he heard. I got him the set of these Chinese bells, the 5-tone Chinese bells that used to be popular back in the 80s. And he heard these things like ringing, like somebody's like ringing the dinner bell. And he thought, oh my God, there must be a windstorm and they're going to get blown off. So he's awakened by these bells, and he looks out the window, and there's no wind whatsoever. Then he said, well, maybe it was like a little squall that came through. And he walked outside, he checked the bells, and the bells weren't moving at all. So then he walked into walked in to make coffee, because that day they were going to catch a bus to go to Lake Tahoe for doing some gambling, because I like gambling once in a while. So anyway, so they kind of met, and my mom said, "You wouldn't believe what I just saw." And my dad said, "Well, you wouldn't believe what I just heard."
Yeah.
And so they talk about it, get their coffee, go down to get into the bus, and while they're on the bus going to Lake Tahoe, they hear that, hey, it's Chinese New Year. It's Year of the Dragon.
Year of the Dragon.
So
yeah.
like they had no clue that it was that it was the year, it was Year of the Dragon. Plus they were in two different rooms, and they experienced different my dad had the auditory thing happen. My mom had the visual thing happen. So
but very bizarre experiences. And we find a lot of this in the family, where they'll see something very bizarre or strange, and then the next thing we know, they black out. Or they'll hear something very odd or bizarre and strange, and the next thing we know, they black out again.
In this particular thing, my parents did not black out. No, they did not black out. It was very odd.
So if I could ask real quick, you were talking about garden gnomes, and there, at least online recently, I've seen a lot more where people bring up folk legends like gnomes, right? It's pretty common throughout Europe, fairies, things like that, when they discuss them, that perhaps they're not folklore. And I see a lot of it now being ascribed to potentially some sort of extraterrestrial or interdimensional thing, is like we, modern times trying to throw our own spin on understanding things. So do you think perhaps that German folklore about gnomes, or English folklore about gnomes and fairies and things like that, that perhaps these are encounters with alien beings? And
yes, could be.
Yeah. Okay.
Very
Are you guys
the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland? Those legends that go back to where the Tuatha De Danann were basically considered to be, like demigods in a sense.
Yes, they were. Yeah. They were tall, very pale, blue-eyed or green-eyed people with either very blonde or red hair. They were said to be the learned of the people, the architects, the artists, the builders, and the Druids also have a similar mythology about them, and they supposedly at one point in time they retreated underground, and they became like the fairy myths of the Irish and the Gaelics and the Welsh coasts. They were attributed to have been like the builders of Stonehenge, able to build large constructions,
manipulate rock,
and then suddenly they just all decide to go underground. And we found hundreds of myths, really, about underground civilizations or underground people. And I started forming a theory a long time ago about it, where, well, my first thought was, what if the flood myths really, because I had just read Fraser's book on flood myths. In the 1700s, this man named Fraser, he hunted down 500 separate flood myths coming from ancient lore of people all around the planet. And since that time, since the 1700s, that number has only been added to. And
about 1,200 now.
I believe Childress said on Ancient Aliens one night, he said that there are now about 1,200 separate cultures all around the world with a flood myth in their most ancient lore,
which
pointing
probably
to
the most
a
recognizable
shared experience. I'm
Probably
sorry?
the most recognizable one would be the Noah's flood from the Bible.
Exactly,
I think
good old
Yes.
the Noah
be the-
story.
In
But
fact,
you know,
Graham Hancock entertained that a lot too in Fingerprints of the Gods.
yes,
He said that
Good
basically
book.
that the human race is a race with amnesia.
yeah. And now we know what caused it. Years ago, I surmised, well, what if the flood really did happen? And I had just been learning about the Coriolis effect with how the ocean currents on the planet always travel to the west at the equator. And it's because the planet is rotating east out from under the water, so to speak. So the currents are moving west. And I thought, well, if the flood ever did happen and it flooded the entire floodplain of the Great Plains of North America, the water would be forced westward. And actually, it would have to drain out between the two mountain ranges right where the Grand Canyon is. And so I surmised back then that maybe the Great Flood really did happen and carved the Grand Canyon in not millions of years, like geologists say, but maybe in a couple of weeks, as the water was draining out the west side of the plains. And this was a theory I'd been working on as, I pitched it to my dad when I was 21 years old. And then I heard about 25 years ago, I heard about the discovery of nanodiamonds in the Uccello horizon and the Younger Dryas boundary. And for your listeners that don't know, the Uccello horizon is a layer of charcoal that was laid down on 10 different countries and four different continents 13,000 years ago. And it points to the fact that all of these countries' forests were on fire at the same time. And one of the ways this could happen would be an airburst from a comet or an asteroid or a meteor coming through our atmosphere, which is exactly what we think happened. But once the nanodiamonds were discovered in this soil, we knew for sure that it was a celestial impact of some kind, because they form in no other way. The dust that surrounds a meteor or an asteroid, that when it comes through our atmosphere, the dust around it is superheated and forms these microscopic little round diamonds. So we knew we were looking for an asteroid or a meteor impact crater of some kind. And since the nanodiamond concentration was highest the further northeast you went in the North American continent, we surmised that it was probably under the ice sheet.
And then 2016 rolls around, and in northern Greenland, under the Hiawatha glacier, we find
somebody found the actual
impact
the
site.
crater. And so now we know for a fact, for sure, that the number one, the Great Flood really happened, and explains why human history rarely ever goes back prior to 13,000 years ago. That's pretty much when human history begins, with only a few exceptions. The Sumerian tablets talk about the before 4 times, way back, but that's just about it. Otherwise, there isn't much knowledge. And what we surmised is that perhaps there was a very advanced human civilization on the planet when the asteroid hit. The devastation following the asteroid impact would have been so catastrophic that any evidence of an advanced civilization would pretty much be scraped off the planet, all at the same time as the 2,000-foot tsunamis would rush to every coast in the world.
And we also surmise too that, because all the myths talk about one thing they have in common is that there was
the flood myths, yes.
the flood myths. There was forewarning and foreknowledge. That there was maybe a number of years, it could be a couple of years or whatever, it says either build the city underground like Derinkuyu in Turkey, or build an ark or
go to
whatever.
Very high ground.
And what we also found too was that around that same time there was a huge bottleneck genetically, that we can confirm that the human race was reduced down to about 10,000 or so individuals at one particular time. So the
can you
people
jump into some of the evidence on the? I was going to ask you if you could jump into some of the evidence on that genetic bottleneck you were talking about. I found that really
Jason
interesting.
Martell talks a lot about it, and you can actually see it.
It's referenced in our book, of course, but I don't remember. It was a scientific study that showed the in a graph the human genetic map prior to some cataclysm that narrowed it down to an hourglass shape.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, we were much more a diverse race of people, and then narrowed down to about 10,000 individuals, from which the entire population has since
You can
regenerated.
see the same thing like with the California condor and stuff like that, where basically with selective breeding and that kind of stuff, that they from 24 individuals that but that's with selective breeding. But you can see it definitely, because there are only 4 base pairs in the human genome, and you can actually tell when you go back generation and generation and generation, you end up finding there's less diversity. So literally, we have regenerated as 8 billion people from only about 10,000 or so individuals.
And there are some definite hints that we were fairly advanced prior to this happening. The megalithic structures scattered all over the world that look like they were built by the same hand, even though they're thousands and thousands of years old,
and
points to a pyramid building civilization that had spread pretty much worldwide prior to the flood, the catastrophe. The fact that they had a fair warning in advance means that they had astronomy, astronomical skills, where they could figure out that they were about to be hit by a comet. And we think, like the human race, we know for a fact has been on the planet Homo sapiens sapien for at least 120,000 years. But, mainstream archaeology would have us believe that we only sat around for 107,000 years without inventing anything, not even the house, And this just isn't the human race, The human race, we're good, bad, or indifferent. We are an industrious, curious, creative people, and
constantly striving to make better things.
Sitting stagnant for so long. And then there's the stories of Lemuria and
I think he had a question there.
Atlantis also being advanced cities, quite advanced. And so we think that they had a space program, not unlike our own, and that they settled, they created bases on Mars. We think the structures that we see on Mars were actually just built by the human race prior to us being devastated by the Hiawatha asteroid.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a question, by the way?
Chris might have a question too, but
I'll
let you go first, Chris.
All right, sounds good. I just wanted to jump in, and I find your alternative view to, I think, what would be called the common accepted version of history to be very fascinating. So, as I'm a Christian by worldview and by paradigm, and I found some very interesting correlations from what you guys were saying based on your theories. The first one being that the Earth, or at least human history, being only around 10 to 20,000 years old, which I don't know how much studying you guys have in like the Christian Bible or in the Old Testament scriptures, but if you go back and just count the generations from Adam to Noah, which are the first 2 big characters in the book of Genesis, and then Noah in through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the established history of the Israelite people. Then you take a look at what the Bible says their ages were as they passed away, then you come up with a history that's roughly, I think you said 13,000. I think it's roughly like 12,800 years. They're like somewhere
yes,
like
exactly 12,900 years is the amount of time.
Yeah, and I thought that was incredibly interesting. And then you were also talking about signs of genetic bottlenecking in the historical account. And so I pulled this up because I just kind of wanted to juxtapose and hold these 2 things up for anybody that might because I was like this the first time that I started studying like UFOs, I think we're supposed to call them UAPs now, right? I think is the newness or whatever.
Yeah, technically, yeah.
You can call in Genesis, what you want.
Right, whatever. Right. In Genesis chapter 6, are you guys familiar with the story of the daughters of God breeding, or sorry, the sons of God breeding with the daughters of man? And
I believe you're talking about the book of Enoch.
Oh, this is in Genesis. It's chapter 6. I have it pulled up here right next to me. But yeah, it just it states that the daughters or the sons of God, which it leaves it innocuous to what that means, is breeding with the daughters of men. And then when God saw that this was happening and Nephilim were created and were walking among on the earth, then he was sorry that he made man and vowed to destroy them. But, and then we immediately go into the Noah story. Noah's family found favor in the eyes of God. And so then we have the flood account, which you covered. And then very interesting, after the flood, you talks about that genetic bottlenecking, like you were saying. We come out of the flood, and it's not even 3 chapters later in Genesis, after the Noah account ends, where we have the Tower of Babel, or some people say Babel, where you were talking about why would all of the different groups on Earth, the different cultures, have like pyramid building? Why are a lot of their structures look the same? Why is their architecture all seem to come from a
by the
central
same hand,
source?
yes.
Right. Well, it's like at one point all of mankind was, according to the Christian Bible, and I'll hedge that, was of a single culture. And even in Genesis chapter 11, God looks at man and says, if left to their own devices, I'm paraphrasing, but if left to their own devices, there is nothing that they will not be able to accomplish.
You know, the Sumerian versions of the Sumerian tablets, as decoded, had a great many stories that were also found in the Bible, but they're subtly different, which is I found very interesting. For instance, this story about Adam and Eve being expelled from Eden. Eden was actually a place in Mesopotamia, spelled Edin. It was a section of Mesopotamia, and it was famous for its gardens. And the Sumerian god Enlil had humans working his gardens for him. And Enlil was infuriated when the other Anunnaki started having sex with humans and creating the Nephilim. And he felt it was an enormous heresy. And so when Eve takes the apple, I mean, he's not furious over a piece of fruit, right? He's the idea in the Bible, when you're talking about knowledge or knowing, it's actually the sexual knowing of a man knowing a woman. So it actually, in the Sumerian version, Eve is not guilty of eating a piece of fruit. She's guilty of having sex with an Anunnaki god.
Yeah.
And apparently, in the Sumerian version, Enlil becomes furious and he's getting tired of the noise of man, and is supposed to be responsible for the asteroid impact. And it's been surmised that maybe they were a spacefaring race actually able to throw an asteroid at us, or possibly just saw it coming and decided, oh, we're not going to help anybody, we'll let them all just die in the flood. And then Enlil's brother Enki, who is frequently depicted as a serpent in the Old
Testament.
In the Sumerian tablets, he's equated with fish frequently, or serpents. And so he was the one that helped create man in their mythos. That in their mythos, the Sumerian gods created man from Homo erectus. He took Homo erectus and uplifted him into Homo sapien, and then over the next 50,000 years perfected the model into Homo sapiens sapien. And this explains, if it's true, it explains one of the missing links between Homo erectus and Homo sapien is an enormous difference in the brain. We cover it a little bit in the book, where they suddenly develop a frontal cortex
and neocortex,
able to reason. And the way I put it in the book is the Homo erectus used to drink water just like an animal. He'd reach his hand into the stream and cup it into his mouth, whereas Homo sapien would build a chair and a cup and sit and drink water because he has, comfortably, because he has figured out how to build these things. In other words, he's a reasoning, inventing, creative thinking being. So it's funny how the Bible, a lot of the stories that are in the Bible have a slightly different version in the ancient Sumerian text. It's really quite interesting. But the ancient flood myths, they had one in the Sumerian stories as well. The Noah was Ziusudra in this case, and Ziusudra's family found favor with Enlil after the flood waters receded, because his family never engaged in this blasphemous having sex with Anunnaki. And so there's a story in how he forgave the family of Ziusudra and gave he and his family the ability to grow crops, and he gave them animals to
animal husbandry.
Yeah, that had been modified to be more docile, the domestic animals of man. And so it's very fascinating getting back into the ancient Sumerian and
Right,
Bible verses, talking about a lot of this. And in the Tower of Babel story, the Sumerian version is that the humans were getting uppity and were building not a tower, but a launching tower to launch a spaceship of their own.
You beat me there. I was going to say, because in the Christian version it said that they were going to build a tower to heaven.
To reach
or
heaven,
a tower
exactly.
to the gods is what most Christian versions would say. And I was going to ask you, and you beat me to the punch. Is in your view, did you think that was, you said, an ancient space program to get to the stars? That's where I was going with it. You think so?
Yes, and also too, scattering to the four corners of the earth and teaching us all different languages. We were speaking one language apparently at one point, and obviously, if you want to keep
people ignorant,
a little more ignorant, then you basically separate them and you teach them different languages. So it wouldn't take more than a couple of generations to make us less of a threat. That's for sure.
But the Anunnaki stories, this was all supposed to have happened hundreds of thousands of years ago. But what I think is that who is flying the ships in our airspace now, the UFOs and UAPs in our airspace now, we think they are cousins of humanity that split away from us prior to the Hiawatha asteroid impact.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever seen the movie Deep Impact?
Mm-hmm.
A long time ago.
Yeah,
they had like the same problem, right? They see an asteroid coming at them that's going to essentially cause an almost extinction level event, right?
Yeah.
So we think they did exactly the same thing. The plan B in the movie was to build these underground arcs and take the best of humanity and all their technology and all of their knowledge with them down under the ground. And so they would have been safe down there, whereas the rest of us on the poor schmucks on the surface would have been wiped out in droves, died in droves, with very, very few survivors. And so we think that this strain of humanity that broke away from us 13,000 years ago and went underground, we think they stayed underground mostly because the Uccello horizon shows 1,100 years of climate catastrophes after the impact.
Well, we talk about in our book in one chapter that one of the things we found out that was interesting is just how frequently these almost extinction level events occur. Meteorite impacts, asteroid impacts, they're a lot more frequent than people think. And if you have the technology to build underground cities, I mean, literally underground cities with geothermal and all that stuff, you number one, you'd be a lot safer because you wouldn't be being knocked back all the time.
And 1,100 years is a long time.
It's a long time.
So people probably got to where they wouldn't want to come back to the surface. The surface is scary. And
a few generations, and the kids would say this is what they know.
And what would happen if you put humans underground for 13,000 years? I'll tell you, we would get paler. Our eyes would get larger. And the pupils would grow so they could see in the dark. They would become thinner. They would become hairless because they no longer need hair to protect the top of their heads from the sun.
I'm pretty sure Tolkien talked about this. This is sounding really familiar.
A little bit, yeah.
Yes, definitely. There are similarities too. We've talked about that too with Tolkien. You took some of his stuff from the Lord of the Rings, from the
ancient myths,
De Dunan,
the
very
people,
cool,
and the dwarves, and living underground for a long time, and changing
the runic symbols, runic language, things like that.
And when you look at, for instance, the closest relative we have on the planet is the bonobo chimp. That's our closest known relative. But if you look at in your mind's eye, what everyone sketches, the abductees sketch of the gray aliens to be, they are standing perfectly upright. They have clavicles, nipples, elbows bending the right way. They're essentially, skeletally, they're the same as we are. And we have a lot more in common with the gray aliens than we do with the bonobo chimps.
Now,
and then there's another branch.
Can you forgive me for just a second?
Sure.
As the unindoctrinated, and I'm sure like many of the viewers are probably not going to be up to speed as well. Can you kind of give me like a real quick, maybe like 2-minute primer when you guys are? I've heard you reference the Greys. I've heard you reference I think the Nords. I've heard a bunch of these things come out. Can you give me like a real quick like 2-minute primer on who we're talking about so I can kind of frame in and follow the conversation?
Sure. We think that 13,000 years ago, the human race separated into two. Beings that kept their technology and didn't lose their culture and knowledge and technology, and beings that were inundated with the flood, barely survived, and essentially were thrown back into the Stone Age, technologically speaking.
And some of these beings actually that kept their technology look very much like us. They call them the Nordics.
The Nordic aliens are described as Swedes. They look like Swedish humans. They're tall, blonde, blue-eyed or green-eyed, and they're very pale, and they are indistinguishable from human beings.
That also explains the ease in which they can interbreed with us.
Yes, that's another thing. They have this bizarre breeding program. I don't think Chris probably has heard of this one, but as we started doing research into the abduction phenomenon, we discovered right away that theory was not actually lining up with the facts. The facts were that the humans that were being taken again and again and again, and then they would start taking their children and then their grandchildren. It's not what we thought, like aliens are just curious about us. They're taking a cross-section of DNA from, cross-section of humanity just because of scientific and curiosity. But that's not what we found was happening. What's happening instead is they seem to prefer a genetic strain of the Caucasian race.
Primarily.
About 95% of abductees are Caucasians. And they prefer, like I say, once they find a strain of DNA they like that meets their criteria, whatever it is for their criteria, they take that person again and again through their whole lives, and then start taking, like I said, their progeny.
Also, their strange need for cattle DNA, and also any other domesticated animal. You also find the same kind of things happen. The skyward eye being taken out, being cauterized,
and they take the genetic organs,
the sex organs, and also they exsanguinate them too. There's definitely a need for genetic material.
Yes.
And
so this would be
also just really quickly here is that these myths tend to segue and tend to interlock with the mythos of vampires. What do they have in common? They come at night. They're very powerful.
They can hypnotize
or paralyze you. Take your genetic material
in the form
again
of blood.
And again. So
very interesting.
You see the crossover here.
And then we began to study the work.
That was our 2 minutes. Okay.
That was the Nords. I think you've got at least 4 other groups I've heard you talk about so far.
There's the Nordics and the Greys and the reptilians and the insectoids. But all of these beings are bipedal hominids. 1 head, 2 arms, 2 legs, upright standing.
Bilateral
just
symmetry.
The reptilians have scales. Now, we believe that these creatures, the Nordics, I think, are in charge of the whole operation. We think they utilize genetic engineering just like we would use any tool. We think, for instance, they engineered the domesticated animals of mankind. That's why there's 300 kinds of cow and 4 types of zebra, and why there's 2 kinds of lions, but there's 300 different kind of dogs.
Yeah, relatively speaking, yes.
We think that this is evidence of their tampering with genetic material prior to the 13,000 years.
And we're doing the same thing right now with CRISPR technology. We're starting to toy around with like being able to cure certain types of blindness. A company called Denali is doing that, and so we're playing around with that because it's really actually with only 4 base pairs, it's pretty easy to identify where the anomaly or the dysfunction is, and you basically cut and paste.
We think
but
that
per your
bred,
assertions,
instance,
we're just
Hold
like 13,000 years behind them, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yes. At least 13,000 years, because we're not sure if they were more ahead of us where we are now when they took their technology. We think they were a few generations ahead. Too.
Now, are there certain of these groups? You said the Nordics, the Greys, the Reptilians, and the Insectoids. Thank you, Brain. Are there certain of these groups that are malevolent towards man?
I think yes. Number one, if we were created in our God's or God's image, we've got the 7 deadly sins in spades. Greed, gluttony, lust, vanity, pride, wrath, and sloth. So. No, who's to say that they don't have some of that too? Maybe what we think is that they didn't lose their ability to be telepathic.
Yes, that's a human trait.
We think that it's a right that we have. It's an ability that we have.
But it's atrophied in us.
That is atrophied. That actually we haven't been taught, or from day one. I think we have it pretty much as children, especially as young children. That we have that innate ability, but
to talk about back to the Greys and the Reptilians and the Insectoids, the point I was getting to was that we think that whenever they need, say, a bunch of underwater work done, instead of putting scuba gear on, they instead breed a group of aliens that can breathe underwater. In other words, they use genetics just like any tool that we would maybe use.
Like we do Legos.
So we think that for some reason they needed reptilians, and so they bred reptilians. We think sometimes at some point they needed. We think the Greys may represent a slave race that they've created from possibly the genetic material they're stealing from white people.
Yes, because human beings make terrible slaves.
Right, we're awful slaves.
We make terrible slaves.
We're a willful.
We sure do. And Americans are the
bunch,
worst.
But the Grey aliens are recorded as being completely emotionless. Therefore, no annoying free will.
And telepathic.
And telepathic.
Is this what I would recognize as like the small, grayish,
prototypical
large
alien
heads,
that you
big black eyes,
X-Files,
Roswell,
X-Files thing,
yeah.
But we don't think they're coming here from distant star systems.
No, it makes no sense.
We think they're coming here from bases around our own solar system. Like we think they still have bases on Mars. We think they still have bases on the Moon.
Dark side of the Moon.
And then there was a probe that was coming in on the moon Phobos, one of Mars's moons, and it spotted a structure right before the probe was destroyed. And so we think that it got too close to another one of the bases around the solar system. But they're also living in underground bases. We know that
we call them cities, actually.
Yeah, cities or bases. And some of these bases are joint military / alien run bases. The 2 in Alaska, for instance.
Oh, those are the research facilities, yes.
Yes. And we think that in the 40s, our government discovered the existence of these creatures. And there was talk of a meeting between the Nordics and Eisenhower in the 50s, where I believe they made a deal of, we'll keep your secret for you if you share some of your technology with us. And we think that that's the reason they refused to disclose the truth to us, because they would have to fess up to this evil pact, which essentially gave them carte blanche to continue abducting the citizens of this country. But I'm sure that the way I'm sure Brandon knows that the way the military mind works is is that, well, if we get technology that helps us win a war, that would save thousands of people or millions of people. So it's worth it to have them go ahead and take the samples they want, and we can't prevent it anyway, and there's nothing we can do to prevent it anyway. So
well,
we'll
let me
just
let Brandon.
yeah, okay.
ask. So I want to talk a little bit about like the breeding programs and some of the other things that are going on, because the concept of the Greys essentially being some sort of like drone species or slave species, essentially, that just kind of does the bidding of like maybe the Nordics or a higher thing. I've heard that before. I'm familiar with it. And when we were talking to Chuck, I asked him one of the things, like, why take all this blood from cattle? What's the point? I don't understand. And one of the things he referenced that I found really interesting is that during World War II and prior, bovine hemoglobin was used as a supplement for human blood on the battlefield.
That's
and
right.
it was also used
the
by
plasma. They could use the plasma.
Yeah, it was also used by nurses.
Too. Yeah,
correct.
Salt water was also used in crises too.
It definitely was. Yeah, but essentially that this is just a part of the impregnation and like hybrid program, essentially, that the cattle blood is like the conduit, essentially, to help bring about these hybrid species, essentially.
It could also be that when they went underground, they possibly took some of the cattle herds with them.
Mm-hmm.
And as a food source that's been living underground. And we think that it's possible that both they and their cattle are becoming less viable, having lived underground for so long, and need regular infusions of surface DNA from surface animals.
Well, let me ask you this. So the idea of having like the supreme race of aliens that kind of runs the show, like you guys said,
right?
The Nordics. There seems to be both a benevolent and a malevolent aspect to them, right? So right before you referenced how there's all these different legends about the Great Flood, and there's these warnings about what's coming. Hey, do this to take care of your family, but at the same time, abducting people against their will, performing these experiments on people, terrorizing people. So my question to you then, like, what in your summation would be the point of being benevolent, right? Is it just to maintain a race of beings to sort of leech off of, or is there so like different factions, essentially, that have different plans?
Well, we don't see them as being benevolent. Okay, we see them as we're a necessity. Okay, we're a necessity, something that they need. Okay, they are not in any sense that we've seen and been able to find that they're just here to be airy-fairy about stuff and just say, oh, well, we care about you, because basically it's actions speak louder than words, and what they've done in the past and what they're currently doing does not bespeak to me at all that these people are just benevolent.
Yes, we think they're serving their own needs and their own agenda rather than serving ours. But we believe, since they're living underground here, once that we discovered the atomic bomb and atomic power, that they started freaking out. They started following our military and keeping tabs on our military. There was the incident at Malmstrom where they showed us that they could deactivate our weapons anytime they wanted to.
Right.
And the incident, the Minot incident as well. And we've learned from the pilots of the Tic Tac incident and the Red Ripper squad that were the ones that got the go fast.
Fravor.
Yeah. They at the hearings last summer, they spoke about that these objects are following our military every single time we go out. We think at the Eisenhower meeting they tried to convince us to give up our nukes, and we're not successful in doing that. And since then, that has been, in my opinion, their highest priority. They're particularly worried about our nukes. And I think that's evidence for our theory that they're here with us.
That they live here.
Yeah, they have skin in the game too. If we wreck the planet, they're in trouble too, right? You know,
so then if you are like trying to understand here, because this is one of the questions I'd written down. if they are like more technologically advanced and they are superior to us, wouldn't you say that they had ultimate leverage to sit at the table with human beings and say, this new toy that you have, these nuclear weapons, instead of asking for you to stop using them, do something essentially
force us to stop using them.
Yeah.
Yes.
So why not force the inferior race of people to stop using their shiny new toy?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. You go back to the War of the Worlds, 1938. It was advertised. This is a play. This is not real, right? But people tuned into it late, and people believed it. Showed how just how xenophobic we are. We're fearful of things that are different or maybe more powerful than we are. So we saw that.
Definitely.
We saw that. We saw also too that that we literally are children, that are playing with very advanced technology and
toys of the gods.
And the problem is that there's 8 billion of us now too. That we may very well completely outnumber them. And when you're trying to get something across to basically something that has maybe an IQ of like 100, they've got maybe an IQ of 250, and it's like they don't completely understand it. Plus, they may also have their own faction saying, "Listen, just leave them alone." Or
right. We think that there may be more than one of these arcs where there's different kinds of them.
They got different they have their own viewpoints on it. Say, the famous Battle of Los Angeles in 1942.
They were supposedly trying to contact us during that time.
They were trying to contact us.
I remember reading that in your book.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention here that we believe that the diary written by Admiral Byrd was a true meeting that he had with the race of beings that are living under the ice sheet in Antarctica.
Again, Nordics.
The Ariani, as they name themselves. In this meeting that he had with them, they essentially said that we normally don't have anything to do with you people. You're barbarians. We try and avoid having anything to do with your wars. So there, and he kept calling him my son, like he's a father to him or a fatherly figure to him. And he told us why they were going to do the abduction phenomenon as well. He said, we're going to take samples of your race so that in case you do blow yourselves up, we'll be able to regenerate you. So that right there explains part of the abduction phenomenon, perhaps. Except I think that's a lie. I think they actually need us. It's more of a need
situation. It would occur to me to be more of a lie. Why tell them the actual truth,
Yeah.
You know what you just reminded me of, Brandon, with that line of conversation. Have you ever seen the movie At World's End? Any of you guys?
Yes.
Oh, the World's End?
At World's End.
Yes, I love that movie.
So, thank you. And so you were reminding me when you said if you've got a race and it's only a few of them and they've got like IQs of 250 and then 7 billion of us, but we only cap out at like an IQ of 100. And he gets to the end and he looks and they're like, what is it that you want? We want to get loaded.
Yeah,
we have a good time.
We want to F off.
Be ourselves.
We want to F off whenever we want to.
And the aliens are like, all right,
you guys are just too. Yeah, we can't deal with you guys.
Whatever.
No.
We can't deal with it.
I'll have to watch
it. Deal with you.
It's a good. Yeah, that's what immediately came to my mind as you were saying that.
We're going to do all the 13 pubs.
Yeah, it's a good one, Brandon. You got to go watch it. It's a good.
It's hilarious.
Yes, we do recommend it for fun, but we don't believe the aliens are blue, inside.
No, not that.
But heads are porcelain or anything.
That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah,
but we think
he's talking here.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's in your book, but it has become pretty popular and on social media and stuff like that. But could we talk about essentially who Admiral Byrd is, following up after World War II, and what Operation High Jump was essentially contextualize that for people listening?
When we bring up Hitler, everyone says God, could it get any weirder? But it's true. In the 30s, Hitler was showing a bizarre interest in the Antarctica continent, and he was expending resources searching up and down the coast of Queen Maud Land with his U-boats. And there was an admiral, Grand Admiral Donetz, was in charge of the fleet, and he was quoted as saying that they found a paradise under the ice sheet in Antarctica.
Right. For the Fuhrer.
And then later, he said, we've built an impregnable fortress under the ice for our Fuhrer, we're proud, the motherland is proud,
Just as a little segue in there, back in the early 30s, Himmler especially was involved with the Thule Society, which was had to do with spiritualism, and Hitler was famously known for like making decisions based upon a spiritualist that would basically, that would read the cards or the tea leaves or whatever it was at the time, and he'd make
pretty common political practice.
Yes, paranormal type practices type. But anyway, so it was a known fact that the Germans were launching multiple U-boats and ships off of the Tierra del Fuego, off of the
and after they discovered something, then they started sending ships with engineers and enormous amounts of resources and tunneling equipment and
liquid mercury.
Yeah, lots of bizarre allocations, to be. So it was surmised that the Nazis had built a base in Antarctica, and at the end of World War II, Admiral Byrd created this armada. Admiral Byrd was a hero at the time. He was an explorer and an aviator and a decorated war hero,
the earliest,
an admiral in the Navy,
the fastest to become an admiral in the United States history. He had nothing but respect, and he had his reputation.
And he had this unimpeachable character, and so when he dispatched this armada to I'm sorry, Chris, did you say something?
And a Medal of Honor winner.
And a Medal of Honor. Oh, yes.
So basically, if you think about it, when World War II ended, it ended around what was it, like around the summertime, early summertime of 45. So by 1947, February 1947, he had already organized
this armada. And he was tasked with destroying this Nazi base.
Right.
And when he went to go destroy the Nazi base, this bizarre occurrence happened. The armada was attacked by a squadron of flying saucers that emerged from the ocean and shot a type of ray at the ships. They sank one of the destroyers of the armada and downed half of Byrd's carrier-based aircraft, and they killed dozens of men. Then the saucers dove back into the water, and at this point, the carrier group essentially turned tail and ran. They had a 6-month operation planned, and they ended it in retreat and defeat in just 2 months.
They went back to Argentina, and then Byrd famously did an interview.
Yes, with the press in Argentina, and he was quoted as saying that quote where. If there is another war, America can be attacked by a foe that can travel from pole to pole in lightning speed or very high speed. And then later he went to Washington, was debriefed and muzzled by Washington until his diary posthumously was found by his son amongst his effects, where he. It makes sense. After he's attacked by this force, he dispatches a plane and flies essentially into the underworld of the Ariane under the ice sheet, and has this meeting. They fly past a giant green field where he sees a woolly mammoth, and in a distance he sees a crystal city. His plane is taken over, powered by these flying saucers that force his plane to land. And then he has this meeting. And we believe this meeting really took place. But he says it was at the North Pole, but he was at the South Pole at the time. I think he was just trying to obfuscate where still trying to obey his muzzling orders. And so he changed it to the North Pole. But scholars believe he was talking about a meeting at the South Pole.
Oh, they have pictures of him in many ways.
Wasn't his son famously like disappeared and
Yeah, I was
then
just about to ask if
wound up
Yes.
dead somewhere, didn't he?
yeah, so I was about to ask Leslie and Stephen if they knew what had happened to his son, because he did. He died essentially as a vagrant, and they
Right.
found his body in a warehouse, and he had essentially just disappeared one day after going on a train, and they
Sounds
found him
suspicious
dead.
for sure, you know.
It's incredibly suspicious about what happened to him, and you would think that for somebody who was the progeny of such a
Such a hero,
remarkable
yeah.
person, right? That
Right.
and for all intents and purposes, his son led a fairly normal life, but just randomly, wound up this vagrant, lost, found dead in a warehouse. Somebody reported seeing him, going in and out of there trying to get shelter for a while. Sort of makes no sense and seems really suspicious. Like he was trying to escape from something and maybe it caught up to him.
That sounds like some CIA bull.
It does sound like some CIA. Yeah.
We know of a few people that they murdered people to keep this secret, to
Yes.
keep the people living
Oh,
under
yeah.
the ground secret.
The one of the first members of Forrestal, right? One of the 12 original Majestic 12.
Majestic 12.
Supposedly jumped out of a bathroom window.
Yeah, very suspicious death.
It was like this ridiculous.
Yes.
And
I was
then,
going to ask you about that.
Yeah, he was sitting late at night in a hospital room on, I believe it was the 14th floor.
Mm-hmm.
And he was right next to a giant picture window looking out over the city. And he was checked on by an orderly who said he was at his desk and just writing away normally. And then about 15 minutes later, he supposedly jumps from the bathroom window, which is a very small window, and he supposedly had his robe tie around his neck. It sounds incredibly suspicious because, he was just sitting there writing a few minutes before. And also, if he wanted to fling himself out of a window, there was this giant picture window right where he was sitting.
And now you're going to tell me all the cameras were off.
Kick out a 14-inch wide window
the
in the
guards
bathroom.
were asleep. And
yeah, what was that, Chris? Sorry, I missed that.
I said, now you're going to tell me all the cameras were off and the guards were asleep.
Yes, exactly.
This is starting to sound
this was
really
1940.
familiar.
This was 1940.
Right.
No cameras, but of course it was just all, the poor man committed suicide.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say about James Forrestal is that he was a notorious overworker. And that he was always at his desk.
Yeah.
Staffers wrote about him being that person. It ruined relationships he had with people, and that essentially he'd been hospitalized a few times for like mental breakdowns because of his unwillingness essentially to stop working. I mean, he just was a workaholic, supposedly.
And apparently he also too wanted to come forward. He was one of the few on the Majestic 12 that said, we should actually come forward.
He wanted to have more
disclosure. He wanted more transparency, as we say today.
Right.
Yeah,
and I was going to say that I think that for somebody with his history, because I don't doubt that he was the worker he was, he wouldn't have risen to the place he wound up at eventually, right, without being that sort of worker. That it's very easy to throw somebody like that again into, a mental ward. And there's all sorts of excuses to say, well, there's a precedent in the history for this. But it is one of the most interesting, quote unquote, suicides. And you guys referenced quite a few. I wanted to talk about Phil Schneider and Pat Price as well.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah. Before we talk about that, could you guys jump into the Special Operations Manual, the Majestic 12 Special Operations Manual, kind of talk about that?
The Majestic 12, first of all, they were intent on hiding this phenomenon from the public as much as they possibly could. Whenever a sighting would take place at, say, a small town, they would dispatch these men in black to, I know it's just like the movie, but these men in black would show up and they would interview everyone and get all of the information for themselves, and then they would instigate this operations manual. This manual was written as a way of suppressing these events. The first step is the ridicule. They would start a ridicule campaign, making it all a big joke, And oh, ha ha, these people are saying the little green man from outer space, and making fun of them in the press. And a lot of the people would just become silenced because of this embarrassment.
Yeah, fear of ostracization, right?
Yeah, the stigma, exactly.
Stigma, yes.
And so then step 2 was to actually threaten them. They would threaten their families and their lives, and they say, we'll kill you if you don't shut up. And if they still wouldn't shut up, then they would actually cause some sort of problem with the person. They would get them fired from their job, or they would get them ostracized in some other way.
Tax audits.
There would be consequences, bizarre consequences. And then if that also wouldn't work, then the final solution was to kill them. And we think that it happened at least 2 or 3 times. That one of the people you were talking about, Phil Schneider, he was integrally important to the Dulce information, the Dulce Air Force Base. It's supposedly an underground base that the first 5 levels underground are human military base, but the 2 levels at the bottom, 6 and 7, those levels are joint alien / human military.
I've read about this. Is this in Colorado?
One of the security.
Hold on. What was that? Sorry.
Is this in Colorado?
No, this is in New Mexico. The Archuleta Mesa.
You're thinking
in New
of Cheyenne
Mexico.
Mountain.
Yes.
I was thinking. Yes. Yeah, okay. But I have read about this. This is fascinating.
And,
yes, I have.
There was a security guard that went under. He wasn't supposed to, but he went to the 2 lower levels, and what he found was a room full of about 100 of these vats. And in these vats, they were growing aliens or hybrid beings. Hybrid alien human hybrids. And this is where we think they're taking the fetuses when they remove them from women. We didn't talk about that, but Professor Jacobs, of the 10,000 regressions he did, 1,100 were women that said that they'd been abducted, impregnated, and then 4 months later they'd be abducted again and the fetus would be stolen.
And you guys feel like this is a breed us out tactic?
I think it might be more like they're trying to either reintegrate with us or infiltrate us to get what they want. And their ultimate goal is for us to denuclearize.
This is so interesting to me because throwing it back to the ancient texts, there are so many examples in Greek, the chimera. I know in ancient in the scriptures we have versions of this, but the idea of like man mixed with something else to form some kind of like what we would call monster. In Native Americans, you have the skinwalkers, German, European, you have the werewolves, right? And so it's so interesting. Like all of this stuff is kind of starting to like swirl together in. Yeah. It's almost hard to divorce yourself from the idea that this all does, like, it doesn't sound that crazy. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can look in any book and find like a correlation to what you're talking about at this point to be like, well, that now it's like there's a point somewhere that draws to this, you know,
and
in some way.
Is it more crazy than that they're coming here 10,000 times a year? From distant star systems, UFOs are reported 10,000 times a year, every year, right? Going back maybe 1,000 years. We don't,
we talk about Sasquatch. Actually, the
I'm so glad you brought that up. I wrote Bigfoot in my notes right here because I was like, I've got to ask about that.
Yeah, the evidence for Sasquatch is pretty much it's over except for the shouting. I mean,
it's actually been a genetic genome has been isolated from hair samples and also water. There is an unknown primate in North America, and that's been proven genetically now. So we now know. And what we think Bigfoots are, remember we were saying that we think that they use genetic manipulation whenever they need to create something? We think that they, the Australopithecus robustus and also Gigantopithecus, they were around 300,000 years ago when supposedly the Anunnaki were uplifting Homo erectus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Giant orangutans,
maybe they were
guys.
experimenting with the other large ape creatures at the time.
Sure, why
and
not?
have created this race of giant ape beings that they can control. And maybe, I think they use them as sentries.
Well, one
I
of the
was
things
just going
too
to
of
say,
go ahead, Chris.
well, this was going to be a question for Stephen, being kind of pulling your expertise into this, because you were talking about genetic manipulation of the species. You said there's a possibility that they use them for centuries. Do you think that Bigfoot, based on all of the encounters, all the evidence that's presented for them, that they have the same type of like forebrain, the same type of problem solving skills that like a human has, but in like, is this the missing link, as like evolutionary scientists would like to say, or from your guys' worldview, do you think this is an insertion? And then talk maybe a little bit about, from your scientific point of view, about like how Bigfoot thinks and moves, and like, are we seeing an intelligent creature on our level? Because it's like, we still can't find his body, right? Which is the thing that everybody always brings up. Well, show me a skeleton then. It's like, well,
Yeah, okay, a couple things there. Supposedly, with the big fires that California's been having, and Oregon the last couple of seasons. Apparently, there was whether it's true or not, haven't been able to verify it yet, but there was a crew of firemen that came across an injured or partially burned Bigfoot, and supposedly the U.S. government they
scooped it up and disappeared it.
And disappeared.
Start Googling, guys.
All right, so that's one thing, but we know from the genetic sampling that there is a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch that is unknown. Whether they have a neocortex like human beings have, which is the most advanced part of the human brain, which is the most recent, and I'm not sure about that. Doesn't seem like they have what's called Broca's brain, which
so they wouldn't have the power of speech.
So the power of speech, but they do seem to have the power of using their eyes and certain types of telepathy. They're certainly not stupid, okay? And
right.
they seem like they have a purpose. They care about their young. They're smart enough to try and not leave samples behind. They're definitely almost all over the world. So we know that there's a lot of them in Alaska and the Great Northwest here.
Right.
So they are, and they're, whether they come from Gigantopithecus or Robustus, we're not really sure, but they certainly are not animals. That's for sure.
We know that there are some of these bases that we were talking about, military/alien bases, two of which are in Alaska. And then there's the ones that we believe is underneath Mount Shasta, is another civilization of aliens living there. And we think in the amount around in India and Tibet on the border there's a lake called Rue something or other. I'm sorry. There's a lake there that looks like it's filled with skeletons. And people thought, oh, well, maybe there was a war or a battle up here. And this is way high. This is up like 16,000 feet or something like that.
Foot elevation.
So it's very, very high elevation above the tree line. And this lake has got all these skeletons. And they started genetically testing these skeletons. And what they are representatives from all different races and all different time periods. It's like when they come to this lake area, something bashes them on the head and throws the bodies in the lake.
You got from Scotland, from South America, from Germany, from China.
Yeah.
There's like this mishmash of
English explorers, there's this mishmash of people in there from over 1,000-year period of time. So what I'm getting at there is we think that the Yeti and the Bigfoot and the Bigfoots up in Alaska, we think they're sentries protecting the entrances to these underground bases. And I know it couldn't sound crazier, but let's say I was a Lemurian living in Mount Shasta, and my job was Bigfoot wrangler. And every night I send out 10 Bigfoots as sentries, and also just to give us information and exploration. Security's of course, I have a tag on every one of these things, right? And so when one of them dies, I have a locator that goes off, and then they go pick up the bodies. I know it couldn't sound
Well,
crazier.
actually, some of the Bigfoot have been seen.
But Bigfoot's
have
been
seen
seen
with UFOs.
with UFOs
Yes.
too,
Mm-hmm.
and so we think there's a connection between them.
So that's a perfect segue. Brandon, I got one more question if you'd indulge me, and then I promise I'll bow out. But something that is very, very interesting to me, and Brandon, this is actually your fault. He got me off on this kick, is disappearances in and around national parks and state parks in the United States. There seems to be massive clusters of these disappearances where people go off into the woods and then they're just never seen from again. And the vast majority of these stories are wild in that the person will have been seen within 10 minutes. And it's usually like, hey, I'm going to bend over and tie my shoe, or I'm going to step off in the woods and take a leak or something.
And then a crevasse opens and somebody grabs them and pulls them in.
Seems like that
happens and they're never seen from again. And these clusters also seem to cluster around Bigfoot sightings, and they also seem to cluster around UFO sightings. These three data points seem to overlap, and so I'd be very interested on your guys' take on that.
Too, where there have been children in some of these areas in national parks that will disappear for a while, maybe a day or two, or sometimes for years, and then they'll show up again.
They'll come back.
And they'll talk about the fairy people.
Those are the weirdest ones.
They were.
Les Stroud, the famous survivalist, he actually went and essentially retraced the distance one of these children that you're talking about went missing, and traversed that distance, essentially determining that it would have been impossible for a toddler to do this and survive. And I thought that was really cool of Les Stroud to try and see if this is even possible first off, but just the fact that that child was able to do that. And then you were talking about Bigfoot before, with caring for their young. There's even other stories of children being abducted by Bigfoot and talking about like a bear taking them, but the way that the children talk about the bear would not behave that way or move that way. Right, not a bear. Yeah, they just don't know any better. But it seems to be, for me, like this really interesting thing about Bigfoot is that every culture has a story about Bigfoot. If you look at like Bigfoot around like the Himalayas, talk about like the Yeti, it matches its environment. Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest matches its environment. So there's all this sort of like anecdotal evidence that it's real as well, because even as if it was an animal, it's adaptable to its environment. That's one of the, I think that is cool about Bigfoot in that.
The way. Yahweh, they call them down in Australia, the same kind of thing. They, or the skunk ape, and the southeast.
Yes.
It's interesting how some of the Bigfoot actually stink worse than others. Some you almost always say, I smelled the smell that was worse than a skunk, and that's one thing that's always kind of intrigued me as far as why they don't have either their natural pheromones are just so strong, that's the way they smell, or they just don't care to bathe. I don't know what the deal is there, but it could be like, some people's pheromones are so, or species of animals are so strong that they literally will have a very strong scent, just naturally.
I was going to ask you, you said that they were able to isolate the gene or whatever and prove that there was an unidentified primate.
Yes.
Were they able to, or they disclose what the rhesus factor of that primate was?
I mean, blood type, a positive or negative? I mean, like a B positive. I haven't heard whether.
I don't know. I'll have to look that up.
We don't know about that. We do know though that with the water samplings they've been taking in Oregon and in California, that they've been pretty consistent. So they just haven't narrowed it down as far as like the blood typing, as far as I know.
I remember you guys writing about how there seemed to be a trend in people who are Rh negative being abducted. That's what I was wondering.
Wait. Hold on. What?
The Rh negative
I'm A
factor
negative.
is
no,
the Rh negative
you can be
factor.
A negative and Rh positive. So yeah,
it's actually a mutation
the Rh
in the human.
Is the negative or positive part in your blood. So you have a blood type, which is the A, B, A,
you either have the antigen there, or you don't have the antigen.
Exactly. So then you're either Rh positive, which would be the A pos, or you're Rh negative, type A, A neg.
1 in 9 people.
Now I'm really interested because
Rh negative.
Hold on.
Yes. And they proportionately take Basque people more often than others, and the Basque people represent a fairly small percentage of the population, and they are proportionately have higher Rh negative factors and instances of green eyes. Green eyes are also a human mutation, and for whatever reason,
they call it a recessive trait.
For whatever reason, it's part of their criteria of judgment when they are picking who they want to take.
So if you're Irish and you're Rh negative, like you're probably screwed.
We're
talking about gingers right now, right?
Well,
is that what we're talking about?
Say too that I looked it up. You can be of a negative blood type and Rh positive. They are two different things. So just because you're A negative doesn't mean that you can't be Rh positive.
No, I believe that if you're negative at all, you do have the Rh negative factor.
This is
let's not get hung up in the weeds, but we can talk about it later. But I'm okay.
Yeah.
But anyway,
there are mixes. We got more sophisticated. Yes, I've heard of that too.
As I started researching the phenomenon and understanding that they weren't taking just genetic samples from a cross section, they were focusing on a person for many years. The way I saw it was it's like a cow. Like when a farmer has a cow, he abducts the cow from the field every morning, takes it into the barn, and removes a product he needs. And then he puts the cow back out in the field to make more of this product. It seemed like that was what was happening to people, that they were actually harvesting a product that they needed, Caucasian, green-eyed, Rh negative DNA, for whatever reason. That was what they were after. Not exclusively, but just a higher proportionate ratio.
The KISS method, like in the military, keep it simple, stupid.
So when I was talking about the cow, it seems like they do tend to protect their abductees, but it's just like a farmer would protect his cow too. So we do know that they will sometimes intervene in a family that they particularly like the DNA of. They will take them again and again and again, generation after generation, and they will sometimes step in to help or save members of this family. And I think it's just because it's not because they're benevolent necessarily. It's just that they like this particular product and they don't want to lose the source.
See, but now it almost sounds like you guys are describing a guardian angel.
Yes,
I've had that happen to me
a few times in Steve's life. He's been
I should have been dead several times.
Something bizarre,
Like what?
I could talk about that if if you want.
Yeah, and his family, it happened to his uncle too.
Yeah, well, first of all, my uncle was in the RAF, and he was stationed in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, just post World War II. And he was like in a sensitive area in your typical, large tents that they had at the time, like 40 guys or so, whatever. And he was awakened in the middle of the night by this tall entity. He said it looked like a black man, but he'd heard about this old Glegley character that had appeared to different family members. So he immediately knew that it was not like one of the natives. And this entity said, "Douglas, you need to get up now because you're about to get killed. If you don't leave now, you're going to die." And he said, "Okay," and then it disappeared
right in front of him.
It disappeared. He said, "Okay, I just saw something, and it's probably old Glegley, so I'm going to pay attention." So he got out of the tent, and then sure enough, a raid came through of some of the local rebels, and several guys were killed, either with machetes or knives.
They had stabbed and shot,
And my uncle became a lifelong. He became a very wealthy man, actually. He built a lot of downtown Palm Springs and that kind of stuff. So, anyways, he became a lifelong. He was interested in the whole phenomenon, like Uri Geller and different things like that. In fact, his daughter's first car was a Triumph, and its license plate was O'Glegley. So, the family took it very, very seriously. That was an instance when he probably would have been killed, but they intervened. I had one happen to me on April Fool's Day, 1992. I was with my ex-wife at the time, and I went swimming. I went body surfing, and this is this is a few miles north of Malibu. So the water, April 1st in Pacific is cold. Okay, so I stupidly, I wasn't in shape for swimming at the time, but I went out body surfing with a bunch of guys, and I got a bit too far out there, and I started to notice that the other guys were going in, and my arms were starting to get tired, and I was getting really cold because the water was in the 50s, and I didn't have any wetsuit on. I just had my trunks on, so I start swimming into shore and against the current. And I'm going nowhere. Okay, and I'm going nowhere. I'm making no progress, and I'm thinking, and my arms start to. The only time ever in my life my arms start to feel like they're lead, like I literally cannot move them anymore. Okay, because they're so cold. And I see this lifeguard, and he's at least 100 to 125 feet away on the beach at the lifeguard tower, and he's like flirting with like 3 pretty girls, right? And I said, "Oh man, I got to get this guy's attention." So I yell, "Help!" And then that didn't get his attention. I yelled, "Help!" a little bit louder. And then I just got whatever energy I had left. I just yelled as loud as I could. I got one of my arms up, and then he saw me. And then right after that, right after he sees me, I go down. I'm down 6 feet. The waves are coming in. I'm down 6 feet. I'm thinking I'm dead. And I start to see the light, the sun light. Think, oh, I'm gonna take my last breath, and I'm just thinking, oh, this isn't gonna be so bad, I'm gonna die. And this guy, I swear to God, how he covered 100 to 125 feet in 2 seconds is beyond me. And he found me. He literally reached down. He knew exactly where my arm was. Reached down 6 feet, 4 to 6 feet, and he got me. And then he put me in the lifeguard crawl position,
kind of chokehold
thing. He says, "Just relax, sir. You're going to be okay." And he pulled me in, and I was just completely exhausted. My ex-wife wasn't sympathetic at all. I could still barely move my arms.
Hence the ex.
I could barely move my arms, and I wanted to like thank this guy. And he said, I almost died. This guy saved me from dying, right? You think he'd be staying around, right? But I went to look around. And guy's gone.
He had disappeared.
Just totally disappeared. And that's one of a couple that I could tell you about.
And it's a huge, long beach. You can see, a mile in every direction, and he was just nowhere.
Plus the fact, even Michael Phelps couldn't have got out that fast. Usain Bolt couldn't have gone out that fast.
So we see instances where they seem to protect the family at the same time. And so when you were asking before, are they benevolent? Yes, sometimes they help people, but we think it's not out of the goodness of their heart, but more
sort
of
a selfish act to keep it going.
Selfish act on their part.
Yeah, you have a prize horse that's
keeping their prize cow alive.
Right.
If I can, and I'm going to ask this as gently as I can, from a genuine place, but say that there was somebody that was just like, no, you guys are full of crap.
Sure.
It's like everything that you're saying. I'm sure you've dealt with this, right?
There's one in every,
There's right, sure. Yes. And you guys have alluded to it a lot tonight as we've been talking, and it's like, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm, and I truly believe that people are seeing things and that they're really experiencing things. I myself have had experiences that I don't genuinely or generally share with people because it's like that would make me sound nuts, in the paranormal. Brandon, we might be able to talk about it someday, but there are things, and I've experienced things, and I know that it happens. But you guys are familiar with the concept of confirmation bias, right? And so the idea is I see what I expect to see, and it confirms the thing that I already think that it's going to be. And so I know, Stephen, you said that your family kind of brought you up believing these things and telling you about them, and my uncle told me about his experiences and so on and so forth. And Leslie, you heard Stephen's stories, you said, before you had your first experiences. So say there was a person that's like a true skeptic that's just like, you guys are just seeing the things that you expect to see because of the way that you were raised or the things that you expected to see beforehand. What would you say to them? What would you say about that?
Well, I certainly didn't expect to see the UFO, my first UFO.
Well, okay. I'll deal with this. Okay.
Okay.
All right. One thing we haven't covered that was also in the book that Chris isn't familiar with at all
which
was
I
what
am going to
happened
read
when
after this, by the way. After this conversation, I'm going to read that
Gonna
book.
read it? Okay.
I will read it. You've gained a
Okay.
customer, 100%.
All right. When I was 18, this was one of those times when we had a bunch of stuff happening that my dad, my sister, and I were all experiencing either together or separately at this house that we lived in Fallbrook Avenue. Anyway, I got so freaked out by the things that were happening that this particular night I decided to sleep in the living room in my work clothes. I was a cabinet maker at the time with my dad, so I was working physically all the time, studying Tai Chi, and I was very, very healthy. And so I woke up at about 6 o'clock in the morning. This is again January, so it was dark. And I looked at my piano, thinking about what piano music I was going to play that day. And I listened to a little fountain in the other room, and I was awake. And from behind me, about 25 feet from behind me, there was the front door. And this entity, this blue-white entity, about 6 to 7 feet tall, kind of walked, but kind of glided. It's almost like when it noticed that when I noticed that I was awake, it decided to intervene. So what it did, it floated towards me in about a second to 2 seconds, and the whole room became filled with this blue-white light. And it stopped by my right side, and my whole right side of my body became numb. Numb from the standpoint I couldn't move it. Not in a scary way, but it was just basically I was immobilized. And I was thinking, oh, I'm going to see the family spirit guide, Old Glegley. I was thinking to myself, I'm going to see Old Glegley.
Yeah.
I'd be one of the few that's seen him, right? But my other part of my body was saying, hey, dude, you can't move, And as it bent down to me, it whispered in my ear, hi, Steve. In this wasn't masculine, but it was whispered in my ear. It wasn't inside my head. It was in my ear. And I was wanting to look. I said, I can see what you look like, but I want to see your face, And it stayed there for about maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then it left. And to this day, I can't remember if I went and told my dad about what had just happened, because he'd had weird things happening too at the same time. My sister didn't want to have anything to do with it at the time. Now she's a ghost hunter, but at the time she was like a born again Christian. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. So anyway, 6 hours later, it's 11:30, and I want to get some lunch. So I decide to find out what kind of money I have. So I reached in my right hand side pocket, and I pulled out all the coins that I had, and swear to God, these are standard American coins from 1979. All the coins are sticking to each other.
Magnetized.
They're magnetized.
And that's supposed to be impossible because U.S. coins are designed specifically so they can't be magnetized.
Non-magnetic metal. We all know that. Yep.
Physical evidence, physical actual close encounter of the fourth kind. I was actually contacted, and I was affected physically, and this was 6 hours after the event. Okay.
And the amount of electromagnetic radiation that would have had to been exposed to magnetize the coins.
I'm gonna read it.
It makes sense that he would be paralyzed because we're electromagnetic beings, right? We're electric creatures, and so exposed to that much current, we think that's what paralyzed him.
Were you familiar with Diana Pasulka's work by any chance?
That sounds familiar.
No, not that I can think.
What has she written?
So her most recent book is called Encounters, but the one that came out a few years ago is called American Cosmic. But she's a professor of religion at University of North Carolina, Wilmington. But essentially her entire body of work, it discusses a lot of what you guys were talking about, where there's this folklore and you're kind of attributing some of it to what people now would call like alien contact, UAPs. But specifically, she focuses on it from a religious standpoint. And so she talks about people that have since been venerated as saints, and that these experiences they've had where, like you discussed before with the flood myth, right? They're contacted by something that gave them information that helped them out, and Noah built the ark or whatever. But people that have been venerated as saints have had similar experiences where beings have come to them and passed on knowledge and given them health. And they also describe essentially a lot of these beings as glowing, or people who observed, these saints now in their chambers praying, or that they were having an experience, that they also were glowing. And then also that the Shroud of Turin, I know that it for a long time was assumed to essentially be a fake, but now there's a lot of evidence kind of pointing at it being real. But that is sort of one of the hypotheses on why that imprint happened the way it did, the full body imprint that's seen in the Shroud of Turin, is that it was an exposure to a high amount of radiation, essentially.
Some kind of radiation to have created it.
Moses comes down off of Mount Sinai after receiving the Ten Commandments. His face was said to have been glowing.
Right.
Jesus stands before the two prophets in the garden, and they tell him how he's going to die. He comes back and his face is glowing. There's so many examples of it through
reference you made earlier about the Watchers and the Shining Ones, they were called, the ones creating Nephilim.
I've got something interesting to interject here. I just remembered. One of our friends used to do body harmony. It's a practice where you do massage technique, but also you do like raising the Kundalini energy and a lot of energy work. And when groups of them would get together, they get this like fine powder that would kind of form over their bodies, and it wasn't sugar; it was monoatomic earth elements, which were also found outside of the
sarcophagi in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid.
Of the Great Pyramid.
There's all this powder all around.
There are monoatomic earth elements, it's very curious that, and also too, there are references to when Noah was born, right? He was like,
yes, he was a shining baby too. He had supposedly when his eyes were open, it would actually light up the room, and his skin and face would glow. We think that there is a correlation between what the aliens are after and psychic ability. We found, like, Steve's family they're a very psychic bunch. His 3 generations of automatic writing and spirit guide talking to, and Stephen is an incredibly telepathic person. He's constantly pulling whole sentences and words out of my head,
even words that don't exist sometimes.
Even just the other day I was feeling kind of stiff, and I was looking for the word, saying, I wonder if detorpify is a word. I was just thinking it, and he said, are you feeling like you need to detorpify or something? He pulled it like right out of my mind again, this and it happens all the time. But what we discovered when Stephen and I began doing the kind of Kundalini raising energy work that where you go into deep meditation and you chant to open up the chakras and you become more spiritually oriented. And as we did this work, we found that these kinds of abilities were growing in us. Stephen's became more and more telepathic. And I used to have a power, I guess, when I was a child. Nobody could lie to me. I was a little human lie detector. I could feel a truth versus a lie, almost like an energy against my aura. And that it faded away as I became an adult. But when I was doing this work, it came back.
And then also she started hearing of clairaudience.
Hearing into the astral realm. And so we began to astral project a lot too. I believe that these are human characteristics of
abilities
that the aliens still have, because they never gave up the practice of keeping the chakras open. That's why they can communicate with us telepathically. And this relationship to us, I believe, is the reason they're able to breed with us. Sometimes I've heard people say, well, are they using genetic manipulation to impregnate women when they take them? Frequently that is the case, but more often than not, the women are actually having sex. And if they're having sex with us and creating children by having sex with us, they must be the same species. It can't. I could see some genetic modification of creating hybrid beings. With test tube genetics modification, and in vitro fertilization, but frequently the women are describing sex and getting pregnant from it. And if they are that close to us, if they are able to breed with us, They must be the same species. And then there was the hair of the alien. That was a very interesting thing. A man in Australia woke up to finding himself paralyzed, and a hybrid alien woman was straddling his body. And she was white-haired with very large eyes and pointy chin and cheekbones. And she put a hand on her stomach and then pointed up to the sky. And there was another woman in the room who looked a little bit more Asian, he thought. But these women have sex with him while he's paralyzed.
Lucky guy.
And then in the morning, when he awakened, he found a white. He found a white hair in the bed, and under the magnification, it turned out to be a clear hair, like fishing line. And it genetically tested as human, but very bizarre. It was Basque, Gaelic, and part Chinese DNA from a section of China where there are only 1% of the population. It's kind of a rare Chinese DNA. So they're testing as human, but this hair is not from a surface-dwelling human being. And we don't have clear filament hair.
And has zero pigment. Has zero pigment whatsoever.
Exactly.
Like zero melanin, pigment. Zero. Yeah, that's strange.
And we have white hair. Albinos have white hair, but nobody on the planet has clear hair.
I can tell you about, before we run out of time here, being as we're kind of going down this route right now, I should mention something that I didn't disclose in the book. We didn't disclose. When I was, this is when I had I've been through boot camp. I was in my second year of my 6 years that I did. A lot of it was reserve duty, but anyway.
And where did you serve, Steve? Who'd you serve with?
I served with the Navy. I was a CB.
Oh no,
I was a builder.
Oh, a CB though. Okay, CB.
Yeah, cool. You know, like
love my CBs.
John Wayne, the fighting CBs. You know.
Yeah, I love the CBs.
We worked a lot with the Marines.
Well, I'm John Wayne with the Green Berets, so we have that in common. We have the Duke in common.
Yeah,
okay.
I noticed they like the CBs best.
Yeah.
We do love our CBs.
Yeah, the Marines and the CBs get along a lot better than the regular.
They have to go in with the first.
We have to set up the the tarmac and that kind of stuff. The Quonset.
Brandon's just an Air Force guy. He didn't know about these things, man. Hard work and
The really smart ones,
not at all. Yeah.
Yeah, Brandon's hard work is like, where's the coffee pot, man? How far away?
Highest ASVAB for the Air Force. Then it's in there.
It is true. They are smarter than us.
Well, I like to remind a lot of the other branches that not people like Chris, right? But that I've probably shot more guns and spent more time on duty carrying a gun than a lot of people. So
he probably has.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was 22. I'll just tell this. This is like only a 5-minute story, but it's something that really lends my belief to what human beings can do. Okay, so at 22, I was doing Tai Chi every day, and I was studying Paramahansa Yogananda's work, and I was either working physically or running or doing Tai Chi, and I didn't have a girlfriend, and I was like not pleasuring myself.
It's really rare.
Okay, so anyway, I was.
You didn't have a girlfriend because you were doing Tai Chi, Steve.
Yeah, well, I really believed the thing about retaining the Jing, as they call it in Chinese medicine.
Yeah,
so anyway,
yeah, for sure.
So this was December 26th. This was the day after Christmas, and I was at the house that my parents and I were building up in Sonora, California. And at that time in my life, I preferred sleeping on the floor. Okay. I just liked it, felt better to me. It was just because I was like 155 pounds, almost all muscle, and just I liked sleeping on the floor. So I read this little book called Metaphysical Meditations by Paramahansa Yogananda, and I read the Christmas meditation about 11:30 at night, put it aside, put a blanket over myself, went to sleep. Then I woke up about 4. It was actually 4:45 in the morning. I know it was because I saw the VCR clock that said 4:45, and I felt very, very relaxed, and I just, for some reason, I thought about God's love. And not being a particularly religious person, I just thought about God's love. And I remember feeling the thought in my brain and thinking the thought in my heart. And it was like these 2 points came together at my third eye. And from, swear to God, from like a billion miles away, this inverted pyramid of blue-white intense light came, hit me right in my third eye, and encased me in a cocoon of blue-white energy. And I thought, I don't know what to say. It's like I had this one, the Zen talk about having one pure thought without anything else, just having the one pure thought, which is supposedly the hardest and the easiest thing to do at the same time. And I just happened to me, either by design or by accident. Then I understood right then 2 things. Either I need to quit the military and go to Tibet and ditch my family and become, a lama,
a yogi,
or I need to continue, helping my family to build this house and not go AWOL. So I decided not to go AWOL.
Good call.
But the funny thing is, about 5 or 6 months later, I was with my father, and we were going to install a job at the Sports Connection, some cabinets we had built, and I was thumbing through a Psychology Today magazine, the back-to-back advertisements, and just passing the time in the truck, and I came across this advertisement for the Rosicrucians, which I'm not a Rosicrucian, by the way. It shows this. It had this picture of a guy laying on a stone tablet with this multicolored inverted pyramid of energy coming down, hitting him in his third eye, and closing him, encasing him in a cocoon, and saying, "You can attain enlightenment via the Rosicrucians." So it was. I showed my dad because I told him what happened, and he said, "You won't believe this,
Dad.
This is
exactly like what happened.
This happened to me 6 months, 6 months before." But mine was pure blue-white. It wasn't multicolored, like tiered, like the one they show. But it blew my mind when I saw that. I said, "Oh my God!" It's one of these things that happen. And I think part of like the with the aliens or our cousins, I think it has to do too with the purity of the soul and the youth and the age, maybe, as far as it may be easier for them to contact us, or maybe be more interested in us.
Yes, we think that it's one of the criteria of choice for picking who they would take.
So in other words, my point is that I know now why these holy men, and why they will sit for 8 or 10 hours a day in a lotus position with smiles on their faces, because they're channeling this kind of energy.
Yeah, even though they're in a diaper on a freezing cold mountain, they're still happy and smiling.
I know that because that happens.
And even some of the more disciplined sects of Christianity still believe in solitude and confinement in order to study the scriptures so that they can also get closer to God. I know, Brandon, I lied. Okay, my real last question, Stephen and Leslie: life after death, yes or no?
Yes.
After humans die?
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely believe in reincarnation.
When
okay.
I was first studying this, the chakra opening work, and started astral projecting, that's when I realized that if you have a soul that can separate from your body and go traveling, that means that you have a soul. And
Yes.
and once I realized that I have a soul, because I wasn't sure before, once I realized I had one, I found it very comforting, because you don't go, it doesn't just go black afterwards. There's definitely a life after. Would you mind if I mention the book at this stage? We didn't talk about the name of it. I don't think
it's flipped.
It's Who They Are and What They're Up To by Leslie and Stephen
Brandon,
Shaw.
you gotta
plug in on it.
Yeah.
You gotta edit this later, so I'm holding one too.
Yes, you got it.
Okay.
And it's available on Amazon and Ingram for bookstores. Prefer Ingram, I know.
And it's also in a Kindle format, and of course
and paperback. And we also have got a Instagram page going where we're putting a lot of Stephen's stories one at a time up on the posting,
and reels,
and also trying to when people approach us about their experiences, we'll make videos of their experiences. One woman came to us with these videos on orbs flying all around her house, and an entity, a purple glob entity that could actually speak to her. And so we put that on the videos, and we're doing more. And that Instagram handle is at leslie.shaw.author. And our Facebook is the same. And we also have a website. It's whotheyarebook.com. And we have blogs and excerpts there, and also any podcasts we do.
Yes.
You guys will send us a link, and we'll make a podcast
Absolutely.
link to it as well.
You guys got to make me a deal. Can we make a deal right now?
Okay,
if you ever do an audiobook,
mm-hmm.
I have a certain proclivity for the microphone.
Oh,
I would love to read your book for the audiobook if you ever want to put it out.
I was thinking about reading it myself, to be honest.
Oh no!
I know. Probably shouldn't, right?
That's a project. That's a project we're still
thinking about doing.
We're thinking about our second book anyway right now. So
yeah.
Oh man, you're already on number 2.
Yeah, let me.
Yes.
I want to hear what your idea for your second book is, and then I want to say something about what you were talking about before, Steve.
Sure.
Well, we wanted to go into our theories about Bigfoot, particularly in the second book, and also just to make our theories clearer. One thing, as a journalist, you're striving for clarity, and ever since we put out the book, there's been new evidence that's come forward, and whenever we get new evidence, we throw it up against our theories to see if our theories still hold, and so far so good. It explains a lot. It explains why they're seen 10,000 times a year. It explains why they're abducting people.
Their motivations.
It explains why they're interbreeding with us, why they're watching our military and dogging our nuclear capabilities every step we take. They're right there watching us and keeping track of us. It explains the incidents with Admiral Byrd. It explains the underground bases where, like Phil Schneider saw, he was the one at the Dulce base where he was killed later because what happened was he was an engineer and he took down a wall, and on the other side of the wall were a bunch of gray aliens, and there were soldiers with him, and they ended up having a firefight between them. And
as the story goes.
I
think Brandon wanted to ask you one more last question.
I'm glad to hear it, because this is I wanted to have you kind of elaborate a little bit more about the Dulce incident, because I know you referenced it in your book, but
yes,
it's really good, interesting to listen to.
It was a very sad story, really. He was injured in the firefight. He had 2 fingers blown off. And he said he saw the wall came down, and on the other side were the tall kind of gray aliens and also some reptilians. And one of the reasons we think that they're all different breeds of the same creature and the Nordics are in charge is because we see the Nordics working with the Greys and the Greys working with the reptilians. They're not like separate races. They're actually they're working together on projects
and
frequently.
Phil Schneider was one of these guys that was coming forward with information, and he just would not shut up about it. He would not be
quiet.
And he ended up being found dead with a rubber hose wrapped around. Supposedly he strangled himself with a rubber hose
wrapped around his throat, which is bizarre.
Really dumb way to strangle yourself.
No, but it would be a perfect way of murdering
pass
somebody.
out first. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Well, I have two things I wanted to hit you with, Steve. First off, what you're talking about before, the experience that you had, one of the things that I've noticed the more I've done this podcast is that there's sort of a way to like download knowledge and channel that information from everything that people that I've read about or listened to people like you guys talk about this sort of thing. And when you think about alien abduction or like contact with aliens, you talked about how a lot of it happens at night when we dream as well, right? And when you dream, your brain releases all these different chemicals, and that's why you dream and have these crazy experiences, and perhaps you're more open to that when that happens, right? But the other thing too is you look at people who are very good at what they do, perhaps, or these people who are brilliant. They seem to be very rare. I talked about this on the last episode with Chris. I mentioned like Jimi Hendrix referenced the Electric Church and talking about sort of downloading that information he had. And then another person I like talking about a lot as well is Jack Parsons, who you guys are probably familiar with Jack Parsons.
Eric Clapton too.
Eric Clapton, a lot of these guys, right? So maybe what you would call for like an artist like Eric Clapton or Jimi Hendrix, you're talking about is the muse and
I know
getting.
exactly where you're going with this. I
Do
know
you?
exactly.
Yeah.
I've had that experience happen to me when I was playing Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 on the accordion.
Mm-hmm.
I was
That is
in
a
concert.
beautiful piece of music, sir. That is a
It's one of the
beautiful
harder
piece of
ones to
music.
play, but I was barely 22. I was almost 23, and I played this in concert. And I had to have a glass of wine before I played it because I just was kind of a little bit nervous. I had been
Right.
doing. It was the stupidest thing. I was doing my weekend duty with the Navy, and I was hanging a drop ceiling, and I was using a framing hammer, and my left hand was just like toast. And I said, I gotta go and play.
And that's your
From
key hand,
memory,
right?
the Liszt
For
Hungarian
the
Rhapsody No. 2. So anyway,
Mhm.
so
that's your key hand for the
I got,
if I remember correct, right? Like
right
you
hand
got
is
your
right hand is the key hand,
Yeah.
but the left hand is
right
the
hand
button.
key is the buttons. Okay.
So, but
yeah.
anyways, I had this experience in what I call the front nine of that piece, which is the really pretty part. That I was literally out of my body.
Yeah.
I felt like I was like what Eric Clapton would talk about, that he wasn't playing anymore, but he was watching himself
Exactly.
playing.
Yeah.
And I realized at that point, right before I got to the second half, said, "Oh my God, I'm here on a stage." And then I went back in my body,
Mhm.
and then I finished up the piece. But it was I had that experience. I've had it a couple times in my life.
That's exactly what I was talking about.
I always
I knew
called
it
it the
was, yeah.
zone. So
Yeah,
I'm
the
a
zone.
guitar. I'm a guitar player by trade, but I also
Mhm.
grew up playing woodwinds. I started
Me too.
just like you on the E flat alto. Went to the B flat tenor and then the B flat soprano. And then after I got out of the woodwinds, I went over to the strings, and then I started picking up the strings. And then my band teacher came to me and he said, "Hey, you should probably actually learn music theory." And then once I learned music theory, it just spiderwebbed for me. And then just like you talked about, it was like, if I can pick it up, and I'm like, if you can show me a bass line on that instrument, I can make it make music because I understand music theory. And then it just like spiderwebbed, right?
Right, like
So,
when I started learning the guitar, this regular 6-string nylon
exactly.
guitar, I learned tablature was so easy for me to learn.
It was easy.
It was like
exactly.
second nature.
And then I remember there was my senior year, I was marching, and my band teacher came to me and he said, "Hey, I need a lead trumpeter," and I was like, "Mr. Female, if you ever see this, Mr. Female," I was like, "I've never played trumpet before." He goes, "Well, I need a trumpeter," and I was like, "Okay." So I spent basically the weekend like buzzing into a cup, figuring it out, and then I learned, the three basic positions, and then blah 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 blah, and I was like, "Okay, that's B flat scale," and then I was off to the races, and I was like, "Cool."
You're a trumpeter.
And within 2 weeks, I could play brass, right? And so I was like, I was that guy, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, go ahead.
In fact, when they still had a Navy boot camp down in San Diego, I was in the drum and bugle corps. I was given the good advice that spend an extra week and a half, but you get better duty.
I wish I would have for the Army, but nobody ever told me that.
So when it came down to being drum and bugle corps, I was thinking, well, what instrument am I going to play? And they had a couple glockenspiels, the big old glockenspiels that were hanging around, which is basically a keyboard, right? I've never played it.
And if you can play piano, you can play a glockenspiel because it's laid out in the same.
I learned the whole thing in like a day. I memorized the pieces, and then I was the glockenspiel guy. But I was like, I was toying around with thinking about picking up the trumpet, but there are other people that already knew how to play the trumpet, but nobody wanted to play glockenspiel, so I'll do it.
Right.
So the kind of
seems. It just. Yeah, go ahead, man.
No, I was just gonna say, getting back to like the whole like muse thing and kind of leaving your body and going to that spot. There are a lot of other people, not just musicians that do that. Do you think that the downloading of like that information, like going to another place where you're getting this experience is happening through you, the music is happening through you, the math is happening through you, the physics is happening through you. Do you think that that's sort of that consciousness that the aliens are using as well to communicate to us? Yeah,
100%.
Yes.
We have it in the book about the guy from India in the 1920s who would he would go to this temple, and there was the
I don't think we did put it in the book, but
Ramanujan, whatever.
Ramanujan.
He was
think I
writing
remember
down
that.
string theory before Einstein even entertained even string theory, and he said he would kind of go meditate there, and this entity would come through him, this goddess, and he'd write down these equations, these high-end equations that we're still quite understand to this day. So I think if you get the brain down to like a theta wave state, like about 5 cycles per second, or maybe even just into an alpha, like around 7 to 11, you definitely change your ability to encode information. I think that, for instance, like reading a book, I think that all people should be taught to read books before they start playing on computers, because right now we're like in beta wave. We're in beta wave right now.
Get the kids off
cycles.
Screens, Steve. Get the kids off screens.
One of the
books
things
in their hands.
Yeah.
Oh,
one of the
man,
things I was going to say with it is what you're talking about. I don't think you guys did put that in your book with the string theory thing. Like going back to Jack Parsons, kind of said the same thing. He would do these rituals where he would get information given to him, where he learned how to do the physics for rocketry.
Right.
But
I think the Akashic record is actually a source of knowledge that's being broadcast out there. And I actually have a theory about it. I theorize that the people under the ground who are superiors in both spiritual accomplishments and also in technological accomplishments, I think they looked at the surface people and realized that they had an enormous problem. They have an enormous problem because they have a huge population of barbarians living above their heads that are just
kind of dense,
too barbaric. And so I think what happened with the Akashic record is that on a psychic channel, they're broadcasting knowledge and trying to raise us up from being quite so barbaric. And I think that's why sometimes there would be the same invention on different parts of the world at the same time.
Right? There's a book about that, simultaneous
like pyramids.
Inventions,
But I think it's actually coming from them on a psychic brainwave that sometimes people can pick it up and sometimes they can't. But the more open people who have been working on their chakras and opening their chakras who are more accessible to it, who have more accessibility to it.
Definitely. And I was
I'm getting a Charlie horse in my leg. I have to stand up for a minute. I'm sorry.
I'll finish my point, and then, like I said, I have just one more question, and we can let you guys go. But Steve, one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of these people we're talking about that are like the greats, they separate themselves from others and their lines of work, is they have these protocols they do every single day, right? And perhaps like you mentioned, you did Tai Chi and you were very into getting into meditation and that protocol of putting your mind in that one state all the time, that perhaps there is something to be said for those protocols where your brain is getting into that different brainwave length, that you're able to open yourself up more for that. And that's why, people, there's a difference between greatness and just being good, maybe.
Absolutely. I think there is no question, for the continuity of consciousness, or just basically if you have a rituals are really important, whether it be chanting, whether it be doing something. It's like they say in music that you don't really become a master until you put in the 10,000 hours of practice. It's kind of like that magic 10,000 hour mark. Yeah. Okay, if you want to really become great,
hours,
you have to
Steve.
do 10,000 hour mark.
I think rituals help focus the mind.
Yeah, and I'm really big upon children learning how to read from a book, because it slows down the brain waves. You actually, with the tactile, holding a book, the tactile, you have to encode the information. You're not just like skimming over it like speed reading off of a screen. Off of the screen, it means nothing to a kid. And also, too, if you don't learn how to slow the brain waves down, you can't get into an alpha state. It disturbs your sleep. You're a lot more anxious. You're a lot more depressed.
It can even lead to madness. It can lead to schizophrenia and madness.
We're seeing people have overamped brains too early, and they just basically go nuts. And you can't just give people Xanax all the time.
Yes, you can. They do.
Well, yeah, they tried that with... a lot of little boys in the 90s, but giving them Ritalin and all kinds of stuff. But
those are amphetamines, and that's another problem entirely.
There is a cure for Ritalin.
Riddle out?
It's called Riddle Out.
Yeah.
Riddle out. Hold on, Steve. I'm writing that down. Hold on, Steve.
Well, my last question for you guys is, you briefly mentioned the Men in Black, but my question to you is, has anybody approached you guys from maybe a threatening standpoint and said, hey, you're flying too close to the sun here? Have you had any sort of experience with somebody who kind of tried to intimidate you into stopping doing what you're doing?
Well, when we were up in Morro Bay this past summer, we had this kind of a weird kind of tall guy with the dark glasses and
aviators.
And he's had like this intense look and say, you guys are on the right track here. Keep doing what you're doing. You wouldn't really be very clear about it, but it was something about him that was saying that you got it pretty much right.
He definitely gave me the impression that he was from the government and kind of checking us out to see what we knew. And but he did. He turned around and said, "Yeah, you guys, you know what's going on." And they're like, "Well, who are you?" How do you know?
It was a little strange, but we haven't had any knocks on the door yet.
Nobody's kicked in the door.
Yeah, we haven't changed our story because we haven't been intimidated to that level.
Yeah. I think if our book becomes more widely disseminated, and if we are on the right track, there may be some point we may be approached to. What we find is that they're pressured to refute their work. Sometimes people are.
Okay, I gotta bring it up as we're landing the plane here. This past year, I know we're heading into a presidential election. I know everything is getting weird, but didn't the government just say that UAPs, UFOs, didn't they just acknowledge? Wasn't there a big reveal that all of that was true?
I want to know.
Just happened.
I want to know who in that group is controlled opposition. That's what I want to know.
Okay, but didn't that just happen? It did just happen, right?
Yes, it happened in 2017.
It's the golly gee. We acknowledge that they're here, but we don't know what they are.
So they're still lying to us because we know they know what they are and that they have
so I guess my
question
is why now and why?
I'll tell you this.
Why put it out?
It happened. The head of ATIP, which was the government's secret UAP investigation branch, in 2017. The head of that branch, his name was Luis Elizondo. He quit his job and went to the New York Times with 3 videos. They're now famous videos: the Tic Tac, the Gimbal, and the Go Fast.
Yeah, they know this, I'm sure, right?
And they wrote a story in the New York Times about it, and to our astonishment, the DOD, the Department of Defense, who had been stonewalling us for 80 years, saying, "Oh, it's not real, it's swamp gas, it's mass hysteria, whatever."
Totally swamp gas.
Suddenly, they came out with a statement right after Luis Elizondo released this information, and they said, "This phenomenon is real. Here are the full-length videos. We acknowledge that this is really happening and it's a real phenomenon, but we don't know what it is." And we're all our jaws just hit the floor.
So plants?
Everybody's got a camera these days too.
Yeah, that's why. There's a video camera on every hip,
Well, that's what I'm saying. I wonder who is controlled opposition.
Yeah, that's my point. So is he allowed to go to the press with it?
I think take this to the upper
press.
Echelon of the NSA are still very viciously holding on to their secrets as much as they can, but there's a lot of pressure to come.
There've been people and the higher ups in Russia and China that have been caught on hot mics that have over the years that have admitted that. You'd be surprised. They say one guy said you'd be surprised how many that are actually walking amongst us right now that you would not know that because again they're us.
Yeah.
Holy crap, Steve! So human skin suits. Let's go to this one.
They're just human.
No.
But they have telepathy and they are able to read minds. That they have an advantage over us.
Yes. They do have an
us
advantage over
regular mortals, you know.
Well, I promise. Last question: is there anybody in like the group that everybody knows, like Luis Elizondo, David Grush, Graves, Fravor? Do you feel like any of them specifically are like controlled opposition? That what they're telling us is what they're allowed, and maybe that it's meant to be antithetical to what is actually going on?
No, I think they're sincerely coming forward with what they saw.
I wonder about Paul Hellyer, the Canadian. Sometimes.
Yeah, maybe them.
Okay.
Because he was talking about a federation of planets, and we know that this isn't true.
Yeah,
this is leaked information.
Yeah, we call it what we want to hear about isms. We'd all love to think that Captain Picard was real, and we've been flying around since 2003, hitching rides on starships. You know, that's one of the recent things that's floating around.
Yeah.
I went to one called Disclosure. You know, that supposedly 4 ships have been built. And then we're basically hitching rides on these intergalactic starships. We've been to 26 different solar systems so far.
And supposedly two of these ships are named after Majestic 12 generals from the 1940s. You know?
Right, and 2 of the ships are named after Majestic 12, which makes absolutely no sense.
That right there was very suspicious.
It should make you feel calm about this.
They're just telling us what we want to hear isms, you know what I mean?
You know, and keeping us looking in the wrong place to keep on looking up instead of looking down.
Instead of down, when they should be looking down.
Well,
we're hearing hundreds and hundreds of reports of the UFOs are being launched from underneath lakes, coming up out of the ocean, coming up out of volcanoes, coming up out of the sides of mountains, out of the sides of ridges, out of the sides of mesas. Right. They're coming from underground bases. We've heard this again and again and again, how they either launch from a mountain or go back into a mountain. Shasta, the Native Americans that live around Shasta have they've seen holes opening up in the side of Mount Shasta and UFOs flying in and out of them, and they've been seeing this for hundreds of years. So we believe that if they're not coming from distant star systems, they're here among us, and they're pretending. They used to pretend to be gods.
Yes.
They used to fool us. Oh, we're gods. You have to do what we say, and you have to become civilized and build these pyramids for us. But then that we became too sophisticated for the God angle to work anymore, and now they're playing space aliens. And but it's all a ruse to get us looking away from where they really are hiding, which is under our feet, rather than up in the sky.
You're saying stop looking up, start looking
down
within. Yeah. That's what that would be your guys' main thrust. Stop looking up, start looking
on both
within.
levels too, looking within yourself and also looking within the earth. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Right, because they are us, and so just a little bit of looking within, and we start to see the resemblances even more. You know, how they are they're telepathic with us. Is it possible to be telepathic with something a different species? We don't even know. We think that maybe not. But they're telepathic with us. And they're breeding with us. And I think it's because they're cousins, close cousins that have separated from us.
Plus, the human mind works in symbolic. That's why the first languages were cuneiform and like stick figures and things like that. Because we lay down through the axons and the dendrites, through our neurotransmitters, we lay down pictures. So we think in pictures, and basically language is basically a representation of the pictures. So that's how the brain works. That's why they can communicate with us any language, because on the basal level, we're thinking in pictures.
Yeah. Well, Chris, if you don't have anything else wrapping up wise, I'll so Leslie can work out her Charlie horse over there.
Yeah, I got a leg.
Yeah, no, you're
I'm
good.
trying to not fidget.
But no, thank you guys.
Sorry, take some Tylenol.
Thank you guys for coming on. As again, who they are and what they're up to. I'll hold it up a little clearer so you guys can see.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, absolutely.
It's been fun.
You'll help me, right?
Yes,
I love a good conversation.
We'll Photoshop in there. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
Yes. All right. Well, you guys have a good night, and looking forward to that next book that's coming out. So
thank you.
Yeah,
and send us a link when you get the book posted.
We will.
I am gonna read it, guys. I promise.
Okay.
After this conversation, 2 hours tonight. The least I can do is read the book. I
Maybe
will read the
you can
book.
have
I
us back
promise.
on when we have the next book
You
published.
never know.
I would love that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Guaranteed. Yes.
Thank
No
you.
doubt.
Okay, thanks.
All right, guys.
Okay,
Good night.
we'll wait.
All right.
Okay.